Broadside, written by Charlie Stratford Rex. Copyright 2022 Charlie Stratford Rex and Vector Meldrew. Episode 1. Friday, July 10, 2037. 10 days before, Paprika stared into the mouth of the machine, trying not to think about the consequences. Its red-hot core glowered back. Fixing 3D printers by hand was dangerous. People lost fingers, or worse. But the software wasn't letting Paprika in. The Flexwork dashboard said they had 15 minutes to get this thing back online. One more bad review and their Flexwork account would be deactivated. If that happened, Paprika wouldn't make rent this month. As a 17-year-old with little work experience, from a family where no one had a full-time job, in a country with 45% unemployment, Paprika was out of options. So, they took a breath, leant forward, and stuck their arm in. Paprika reached into the machine's hot central chamber. It smelled like a burning tire. Knots of wire twisted between the sharp metal extruder arms either side of them. The printer was top of the line, Paprika noticed as they tried not to get their hand burned off, the brand new Proto 3D1. Where Paprika lived, people didn't have printers this nice. It was as large as a washing machine. This model could print anything from luxury linens to synthetic living tissue. If Paprika ever got to own one, they'd print Dad that medication he needed. Not that he'd take it. Paprika dug through the printer's guts, searching for the problem, careful not to touch anything hot. Their legs left the floor as they leant in. Their guess was something was clogging the main filament tube. Paprika hung upside down, trying to reach it. The glowing printer bed warmed Paprika's face as they stretched past it. If they touched it, third-degree burns were all but guaranteed. The side of the machine dug into their stomach, making it hard to breathe. Then their hand touched something, a hard, calcified lump. Paprika clawed at it, struggling for purchase, closing their grip around it. "Excuse me," bellowed an unfamiliar voice. Paprika recoiled in shock, losing their grip, smacking their head on the extruder arm above. Pain shot through their skull as they pulled themselves up. "Hello? Excuse me?" snapped the voice again. Paprika heaved themselves out of the machine, clutching their stinging head. A woman in her 20s wearing expensive yoga clothes stood before Paprika. She did not look happy. Paprika blinked open luminous, their neural operating system. Some people still didn't like the idea of a chip in their head beaming a digital layer of information over reality. Paprika couldn't remember life without it. Icons and info bubbles appeared to Paprika, causing their eyes to shift through a spectrum of colors and shapes, letting others know Luminous was on. The woman's name was Jane Stratton. She was the client. She worked at Proto, which explained the state-of-art printer, but Paprika didn't have time to read her bio. Flexwork said there was 10 minutes left to finish the job. "Exactly how much longer do you think you'll be?" Jane asked. "Every printer in the house is connected to this main unit. I can't print food, work stuff, anything. Do you speak English?" Paprika straightened up and turned to Jane, wiping the machine grease from their face as they took off their cap. Paprika's short, colorful hair clashed with their digitally augmented eyes. Paprika raised a striped eyebrow. Jane looked taken aback, but Paprika was used to this. "You didn't see a lot of teenagers doing printer repair." "I dunno, ma'am. Your filament tube is jammed up pretty good," Paprika answered with a smile, doing their best to be client-facing, as per the instructions in all the Flexwork training videos. "Good news is there's a backdoor admin for this model. Getting in there would speed things up. Your housekeeper didn't know the password. Do you know it? Your parents home? Would they, maybe?" Paprika trailed off. Jane looked like she had been slapped. "My parents? This is my house. Look, this is new. I don't know about any backdoor admin. Who even uses passwords anymore?" Jane took a breath, trying to remain calm. "Listen, I need to go. You people have been out here twice this month already. I need this back online tonight, or no tip. Comprende?" Paprika's smile vanished. They hadn't meant to insult Jane and needed this job. But, "you people, no tip, and comprende, all in the same breath? Dios mío." Paprika narrowed their eyes. Jane took a step forward and gently put her hands together, as if praying. I really need this done. And you need me to give you a good review, right? Jane asked softly. So, let's help each other out. Paprika looked down at Jane's perfectly manicured hands, and then at their own greasy fists, cut and burned from endless hours fixing printers. Paprika's stomach growled, a reminder they hadn't eaten yet. Taking a breath, Paprika forced a cheery nod. Jane smiled curtly, turned, and marched out. Paprika watched her go. It was hard to believe a woman just a few years older than them had a place like this. Even the utility room had a view. Jane's townhouse stood high on a hill in San Francisco's Noe Valley neighborhood, looking out at the bar graph of glass and neon downtown. The skyline was alive. Buildings covered in exotic vegetation and tapestries of digital displays glowed. Dynamic skyscrapers oscillated and rippled. Holographic advertisements and road signs floated around the city like wraiths. Pan-up drones buzzed over the commuter traffic. A jagged glass spike dominated it all, belittling both the Transamerica pyramid it mimicked, and the Salesforce tower it mocked. Proto HQ represented everything people either loved or hated about 2030s America. For Paprika, it was just another giant company they did badly paid, temporary work for. Places like this made them feel dead inside. The world Jane occupied, this house and that skyline, were about as accessible to Paprika as the lump in the printer. A lump they now had 6 minutes left to retrieve. Paprika leaned back in, connecting their luminous interface to the 3D one. They opened the login screen and burrowed back down to the filament tube. They remembered something Dad had given them, an application called Brute Force that found passwords. He'd built it himself. Wasn't exactly legal. It was based on some old program from the turn of the century he used as a kid. It didn't work on most modern systems, but Paprika booted it up anyway. Tinkering with obscure technology was the only thing they really had in common. Dad avoided most other subjects. Like why Paprika and their brother had to cover the rent so often. Or what really happened to Mom. It was either because Brute Force was so outdated, or because the printer was so new, but the app opened, undetected. It began trying the endless number of possible combinations to the admin panel. It estimated it would take 4 hours to crack the password. Paprika panicked. They had 5 minutes. Paprika closed the app and jammed a hand back into the machine. As Paprika dug around, a phone icon appeared, illuminating the darkness as it rang. It was Carlos, their older brother. Sup? Paprika said, nodding to answer. We need you, said Carlos. We're outside. What? I'm working, Paprika objected. What for? Fins out, he replied. It's a league game. This is it, Paprika. Paprika pulled themselves out of the machine, taking this news in. The world around them seemed to fall away. Nothing was more important right now than making the rent. Nothing except Broadside. If they won a league game, the rent would be covered, and then some. If they did well, they could even make the Bay Area finals. That would change everything. Carlos had never asked Paprika to play a league game before. It wasn't even legal technically, what with Paprika being a junior and all. They felt their chest tense. It was too risky. But my gear? I only got gloves, everything's at home. I gotta. There's no time, said Carlos. He was right. Paprika looked into the printer. 3 minutes left to finish the job. The lump at the bottom of the machine suddenly seemed like it was miles away. Paprika looked out at the skyline again. This is our shot, Paprika. Yes. Or no. Paprika let themselves out the back so as not to alert Jane, creeping around the side of the house with their tool bag. They were strafing across the front lawn when they heard Jane yell from the front door. They locked eyes. Paprika froze. Paprika thought for a second about the scathing review Jane would leave for rugging her on this job, and what that meant for their future as a flex worker. But it was too late. Paprika was already outside. So they ran. Jane started to run too. As Paprika hit the pavement, Carlos and his best friend Riz lurched up in a self-driving share car. The vehicle didn't look roadworthy. Because of their social credit score and luminous, The share car system always sent Paprika and Carlos the lowliest possible hoopties, but this thing didn't look like it would make it down the hill. The radio was tuned into Carlos' favorite station, Culture Cult. 3D bass music bumped from the grimy little pod as it rolled to a stop, with waves of sound visibly disrupting the air. Jane shouted something, but it was lost under the din. Paprika dived into the share car as its door swished open. A small tinfoil square with a QR code on it dropped from their bag onto the sidewalk. An NFT holotag. A chip that could transmit non-fungible information, in this case, a custom 3D holographic image of Paprika in their Broadside armor. Paprika thought about retrieving it. It was their second to last one and they couldn't afford to mint any more poses. But Jane was too close. "Go!" Paprika shouted. The car door swished shut as it pulled away, tires squealing. Adrenaline pounded through Paprika's chest. This was insanity, but it felt good. Paprika felt alive. Carlos increased the car's speed as much as the user interface would let him. Paprika looked back at Jane, standing in the street, staring daggers after them as she bent down to pick up Paprika's NFT holotag. That was not good, but the tag wasn't connected to their real Luminous ID. Paprika kept Broadside stuff in a separate wallet. Jane shrank as they sped downhill towards the glowing skyline, the 3D bass music leaving ripples of sound in their wake. Then Paprika noticed something else. Behind Jane's house, on other side of the valley, the ramshackle silhouette of the South San Francisco slum towers reached into the sky like broken fingers. If they won tonight's game, their financial troubles would be over. If they lost, Paprika knew the slums was where they would end up. Carlos and Riz crashed through the doors of the warehouse like bandits entering a saloon. Stickers and graffiti covered their thin armor suits, known in the game as bone suits. The bone suits were gunmetal gray, with the last remains of a blue and pink paint job clinging on. The armor was scratched and shredded, as if fashioned from pieces of old skateboards. Skull-shaped helmets covered their heads, but their eyes remained visible through their visors. Stenciled across their backs were the words, "Skeleton Crew." Paprika trailed behind Carlos and Riz, struggling to get their helmet on, breathing hard. Paprika couldn't get comfortable in this bone suit. It belonged to Finn, the official third member of Skeleton Crew, who had busted his knee. It was too small in some places and too big in others. The helmet didn't fit properly, and it smelled like old socks. Everything chafed. The only way to get the pants on was by leaving the fasteners undone at the back. Paprika cursed Finn's narrow ass. But it would all be worth it. Paprika adjusted their suit and caught up with the others, taking in the surroundings. It was Paprika's first time on this course. The junior league played in a smaller space across town. Didn't matter though. They'd watched Carlos, Riz and Finn play here so many times they could run this map with their eyes shut. But they'd never actually been down here before, in the pit. The vastness of the arena was intimidating. A handful of kids were posted up high the bleachers where Paprika usually sat. Beams of late afternoon sun streamed down from skylights. The faint smell of burnt rubber and sweat hung in the air. Obstacles with unlikely geometry covered the floor. Platforms jutted from the walls at odd angles. It might have passed for an art exhibit, or a paintball course, but there were no patrons, or paint marks. Paprika slowed up as Carlos and Riz stopped ahead. Two jagged forts stood on stilts at each end of the arena, facing each other across the maze of obstacles. Riz opened her visor, her eyes skittering across the field. She was 19 with wild curly hair and dark features. People always thought she and Carlos were a couple. They had been friends since they were kids and had forged a strong bond through Broadside, but it was purely platonic. Low-key, Paprika had always liked Riz. She was beautiful, and a tough Broadsider. She had this vulnerable thing about her too. They never talked about it, but Carlos didn't like Paprika crushing on Riz. Paprika caught her looking back sometimes though. "So what's the alpha? How we doing this?" Riz asked. Carlos lifted his visor. He was sleek and stony-faced, with the same pink, blue and yellow luminous eyes and tan skin as Paprika. He surveyed the terrain. Paprika followed his gaze over to three shadows lurking inside the far fort. Head left, Carlos said to Riz. I got right. He turned to Paprika, who nodded in approval at his plan, shifting uncomfortably in the borrowed armor. I'll head down the middle and meet them head-on, Paprika offered, sounding hopeful. Carlos thought on this for a second before shaking his head. Nah. Cover us from the crow's nest, he said. And don't be getting all nervous. Paprika looked up at the nest perched high on a support beam close to the roof of the arena, then back at their brother. They didn't like heights. Had one too many bad falls last season. I'm not, Paprika replied, it's just. You're smaller than we are, and I don't want them to figure out you're a junior, Carlos replied. Which means you snipe. Which means you post up there. Aight? Paprika looked at him, hating it when he was right. It didn't matter how capable Paprika was. Carlos was one of the best Broadside players in the senior league. Paprika was a punk kid lucky enough to call him their older brother. But at least Paprika was here. A senior league game, and not even 18 yet. They would be banned so hard if the league found out. Carlos turned and walked on towards the fort closest to them. Fall in line for once, he muttered over his shoulder. You know these rich assholes got way more weapons and ammo than us. We only win by playing as a team. We do this and I could be looking at the pros next season. Like for real. You do get that, right? I get it, Paprika answered, seeing that Carlos was getting anxious. Paprika knew what tonight meant for all of them if they won. Hey, Paprika said. Carlos stopped and looked back. I also get what it means that you asked me to play tonight, Carlos. I won't let you down, bro. Carlos smiled and nodded. Bones up, he said, holding out a fist. Bones up, Paprika replied, dapping him back. They both popped in their mouth guards. Paprika followed Carlos and Riz up into the fort. Just then Luminous pinged, informing Paprika that they had a new review on Flex work from one Jane Stratton, and that their Flex work account had been deactivated. Paprika swiped the message away and looked at their bank balance. They had barely been able to afford enough non-fungible ammo to get through half a junior league game. Never mind what they were about to attempt. It didn't matter. There was no going back. The only way out of their current problems, and the only way they might ever get to a better life, was to win this game. Inside the fort, glowing words flickered in the darkness. Welcome to Broadside. Copyright 2022-2037, by Proto Registered. Rug Mob wants to play, capture the flag. First team to capture the flag in the center of the arena wins. Accept? Reject? Carlos nodded accept. A fresh screen appeared in front of Skeleton Crew. On it were the 3 members of Rug Mob, the team in the opposite fort. They looked older to Paprika, or at least bigger, or at least, scarier. Carlos glanced over at Paprika and slapped their helmet down so the skull completely hid their face. Paprika peered out through the skull's eye holes at Rug Mob. The opposing team's bone suits were box fresh, painted high-gloss metallic blue. There wasn't a dent or scratch in sight. They all had immaculate clothing too. Grail-level hoodies and super rare broadside camo patterns, shirts from vintage CC0 artists. A hot favorite with broadsiders right now. These were their clothes for fighting? Paprika couldn't believe how relaxed they were. They hadn't even put their helmets on yet. The 3 members of Rug Mob couldn't have looked more different. The tallest was a huge corn-fed lump of brawn with a torso like an aircraft carrier, with immaculate eyeshadow, lipstick and hair pinned up in a bun. Their full name was Siobhan, but everyone called them Shiv, on account of their blunt and brutal style of play. Next to Shiv stood Taki, a sinewy, waifish Asian kid with long blonde hair and an icy stare. He wore eyeshadow and lipstick that matched Shiv's. Taki was the yin to Shiv's yang. A skilled sniper who could no-scope a kid at the opposite end of the arena, while Shiv was a battering ram, vicious and merciless at close range. They were an odd couple, but together, a complete weapon system, with flawless makeup. Jason, Rug Mob's leader, was a different story. There was nothing non-binary about this guy. He was a tanned jock with slick hair and jacked-up muscles. He was headstrong, hard-charging and played dirty, a stone-cold douchebag. From what Paprika had seen, Other than having rich parents, Jason had got where he was in the league by bending rules and barking orders. He was a strategist. He would hold the middle ground, using Shiv and Taki's short and long-range abilities to achieve full-spectrum dominance on the field. He leaned into the camera, his trillion-cut gold grill filling the screen. "Namaste, betches. Sup," Carlos replied, avoiding eye contact. Jason eyed Riz through the feed. "Hey Rizwana, you gonna put up a real fight this time? Or turn your shock pads off, like last time? My bone suit was lagging, I told you." "And it's just, Riz," she replied. Glowing holographic skins of NFT armor stitched themselves together over their bone suits. Gamer tags, stats and health meters appeared above their heads. Carlos was Carlo 5, and Riz was R1Z. Most kids just used first names in the senior league, getting ready to go fully doxed if they were in the 0.1% lucky enough to turn pro. But Paprika had signed in on a brand new guest account, and the temporary gamer tag they had chosen was WarHE4D. Paprika didn't know why they picked it. It was the name of this old drum and bass song that Dad always used to play. A lot of people used aliases in the junior league. Rookie mistake. Shiv noticed first. WarHE4D? That ain't a league tag, this is a noob account. "Where's Finn?" Shiv asked. "Yo, who is this kid?" Paprika looked at Carlos. His shoulders slumped as he let out a frustrated sigh. Paprika opened their mouth, instinctively wanting to answer Shiv, and then closed it. If Rugmob realized there was a junior on the field, Skeleton Crew would forfeit before the game even begun. Paprika never liked staying in Carlos' shadow, but losing would be worse. Way worse. Best to stay quiet and let him handle this. New words appeared. Skeleton Crew vs. Rugmob. Finn janked his knee, Carlos replied, waving it away like it was nothing. "We had to bring in a sub last minute is all." Carlos did his best to sell it. He always sounded so assertive to Paprika. Hard-nosed and broad-shouldered. People listened to him, respected him. Paprika figured it would be cool. But from the look on Rugmob's faces, it was clear that it was very far from cool. "What are you trying to pull, bro?" Jason demanded, spitting out his mouthguard to talk. "This ain't regulation. You don't sub in a league game." "Not with us," added Shiv. "Nah, bun that." Taki agreed, shaking his head. "No freaking bueno man," said Jason. Paprika panicked. If Jason reported them, they were toast. Riz opened her mouth, as if to protest, then bit her lip. New words scrolled overhead, glowing hot pink in the dark of the fort. Paprika looked down as a meager handful of NFT guns, grenades and ammo appeared at their feet. It wasn't enough, but it was all they could afford. Paprika looked back at the screen as an arsenal of weapons appeared at the Rugmob fort. They must have swept the floor at the ammo shop. It was like Christmas morning over there. Jason glared back, loading NFT clips into NFT guns and snapping NFT guns into NFT holsters. Taki's bone suit was groaning with exotic munitions. Shiv picked up a ballistic ball and chain that only a kid with their immense frame could lift, if it were real. It looked like a WW2 naval mine on a leash. "I say, let 'em put a noob up against us." Shiv chuckled, looking at Paprika with a smirk. "I mean, look at this little snot, standing all wonky like a verkle tree. Look at these little ass weapons they bringing. Yo, you use food stamps to get these? We're gonna teabag they sorry ass all over the map." Taki sniggered and bumped fists with Shiv. Jason looked at his teammates with a smile, thinking on this. "Alright, whatever," shrugged Jason. "What's your name, bruh?" Paprika's mind raced, their blood getting hot. They had to say something, but they promised Carlos they'd stay quiet. The league could not find out Paprika was underage. But teabagging? Verkle tree? Paprika had to clap back. "First off, I ain't your bruh, Paprika said, squaring up to Jason through the camera, keeping their helmet and voice low. Secondly, Paprika continued, turning to Shiv, "Your mom looks like a verkle tree. I ain't afraid of no rich brats from Marin. I got all I need right here to take care of you." It felt good, watching them recoil from the camera in shock. Not so great a split second later, when they all burst out laughing. Wait, wait, wait. This little runt can't even fit in a bone suit, and they out here trying to talk smack? Yo, are you serious, kid? Said Tacky. Carlos motioned at Paprika to back down. But now they were all laughing. Now Paprika was mad. How about I come for you first, honey? Paprika growled back at Tacky. We'll see who's serious. The laughing stopped. Tacky glared. Jason nodded ominously. The teams readied their weapons as a countdown appeared. Jason studied Paprika calmly. You really want to get on the wrong side of us? You sure about that, War HE4D? 4. Don't push him, Carlos whispered to Paprika. Bad idea. 3. Paprika picked up a sniper rifle and looked back at Jason. Wrong side? I'm gonna be on every side of you, dickhead. Jason's eyes bulged. Carlos hid his face in his hand. 2. Dickhead? Jason shouted from his screen. Kid, I'm a foo. Paprika swiped away the screen before he could finish. It didn't matter how tough Rug Mob were. Paprika had quit their job for this. The mark on their social credit score would be permanent. There was no going back. 1. The rest of the screens vanished. Skeleton crew crouched. Ready. Mouth guards in. Weapons cocked. Adrenaline rising. Visors down. Bones up. Carlos bellowed. Start. From then on out, everything was a blur. Paprika leapt from the fort, sniper rifle across their back. Their bone suit whirred into gear as they landed, absorbing the fall. They burst into a sprint, the bone suit enhancing their athletic abilities. Paprika's heart thumped as scenery flew by. Riz darted left, brandishing an Uzi, the gecko grip on her bone suit enabling her to run up the walls for a few seconds at a time. Carlos strafed to the right with a battle rifle. He bounded up a ramp onto a platform above Paprika, just below the crow's nest. Carlos narrowed his eyes at the 3 blue shadows weaving between the obstacles ahead. I see him. You got the shot, Paprika, he said over Skeleton Crew's voice channel. Paprika looked nervously at the crow's nest 20 feet above. Go, Carlos shouted. Are you scared of heights, or are you a broadsider? Because you can't be both. Paprika took a deep breath, engaged their bone suit and sprang into the air. They landed shakily on the platform, legs wobbling like a newborn foal. They tried to ignore the drop below and focus, their breath fogging their visor. In the distance, they saw 3 shimmers of blue camo as Rug Mob advanced from the other direction. Paprika forgot the height, crouched, and aimed. Through the scope, Paprika watched Jason leading Rug Mob through low ground, flitting between obstacles, aiming a laser rifle. Tacky was behind him with a giant nail gun. Shiv followed swinging the ballistic mace. Let's show these simps what's up, rallied Jason. Sag and drag baby, bellowed Shiv. Slice and dice man, replied Tacky, slice and shwoo. Paprika smiled. A round sliced Tacky's NFT nail gun clean in half. It burst into pixels and disappeared. Tacky froze in shock for a split second before he could dive into cover. That was all Paprika needed. Shabam! The second bullet hit Tacky between the eyes, obliterating his digital helmet. The shock pads in his bone suit jolted him back onto the dirt floor. Tacky's power level fell to 0 as his digital layer of NFT armor flickered and disappeared. The words, War HE4D Snipes TAK1, appeared overhead in big letters. A countdown above Tacky's head glowed, indicating he had 10 seconds before his NFT armor and weapons would respawn. Tacky sat up, cursing. His immaculate bone suit was now caked in wood chips and dirt from the warehouse floor. Paprika looked down at Riz as she read the words projected overhead. She ran forward, victory emboldening her. Ha 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 ha, she shouted in Tacky's direction. You're in Skeleton Crew's house now. We told you. Thwam. Shiv barreled out of cover, putting all their weight behind the ball and chain, silencing Riz, swatting her high into the air. Paprika watched Riz's NFT armor shatter as she was hurled upwards, sailing through the letters in the air that read, SH1V Broadsides R1Z. and began plummeting back to Earth headfirst. Helpless. Just before Riz hit the ground, airbags burst from all over her bone suit. She bounced along the floor unharmed, breathing a sigh of relief as the bags deflated back into her suit. Paprika watched from the crow's nest as Jason and Shiv turned on Carlos, guns blazing. The air was thick with tracer rounds, laser bolts and sniper fire. Grenades rained down. Explosions rang out. Yet Carlos, one of the best defensive players in the Bay, dodged it all with ease. Paprika aimed down into the carnage, trying to pick off Jason and Shiv. Adrenaline pounded behind Paprika's eyes. They really didn't like heights. They adjusted their helmet, wiping the condensation from their visor. The game's graphics glitched out as they did so. Luminous was playing up with all the moisture. Paprika could still see the Broadsiders' real bone suits, enabling them to jump higher, run faster and take nastier falls, but not the bright-colored holographic NFT armor. No NFT weapons or explosions. No sound effects or game stats. They opened their visor and furiously rubbed their eyes until the system readjusted. The holographic armor, weapons and explosions appeared again, a blanket of cartoon violence over reality. Paprika watched as Shiv got too close to Carlos, close enough to hurl a slime grenade, a sticky ball of explosive goop which latched itself to his back. He tried to reach back and rip it off, but Blum! SH1V, nades CARLO5. That was it. Paprika jumped from the crow's nest as the words scrolled above. It was time to go in. Paprika raced through the smoke towards Shiv's lumpy silhouette, staying low and out of sight, aiming the sniper rifle through the smokescreen with one hand at the spot just in front of Shiv's head. Blow! War HE4D no scopes SH1V. Paprika smiled and kept moving, knowing better than to stay in one spot. They were gone before Shiv's body hit the floor. The smoke cleared. Paprika could see the flag up ahead. Riz was back in the game, and almost on it. Then Paprika clocked Jason, taking aim at Riz from the left. Paprika broke into a sprint as Jason unloaded. Laser bolts tore into Riz's digital armor. Paprika watched Riz stumble, straight into Taki's line of sight. Taki aimed the nail gun and Skur Ranch! A giant nail buried itself in Riz's visor, prompting the shock pads in her bone suit to push her back. She fell to the ground with a thud. Tak 1 nails R1Z. The holographic nail and armor evaporated into pixels. Riz sat up, winded. She punched the ground as her overhead countdown began. Paprika crept up behind Riz and Carlos, staying in cover. It was down to Paprika to keep Rugmob away from the flag until their teammates could respawn. They hurled the one slime grenade they had in Jason and Taki's direction, who leapt for cover behind a platform. The grenade exploded, narrowly missing them. Jason fired back from behind the platform, but Paprika was already gone. Taki peeked around the platform half grinning, half pouting at Riz who was still on the floor waiting to rejoin the game. Ooh, nailed in your own backyard, Taki hissed. That's gotta crack. The butt of Paprika's sniper rifle slammed into Taki's helmet. War HE4D broadsides TAK1. Not as much as that, smirked Riz. Taki fell for a third time as Paprika trampled over him, firing at Jason. Taki kicked a leg out, tripping Paprika. This was technically a foul, as Taki was still waiting to respawn. Paprika didn't have time to object as their face hit the ground. Paprika rolled over, winded, wiping the dirt from their visor. Jason aiming his laser rifle right at them. He pulled the trigger, raking the floor with spikes of light. Paprika writhed away, dodging the firestorm. They scrambled to their feet and fled. Paprika looked up at the flag high on a platform above. All they had to do was take it and get it back to their fort. Idiots. Paprika couldn't believe they had let them get this close. Paprika sped up. Both Jason and Shiv were on their tail. Sping! A round nicked Paprika's leg. The holographic NFT armor plate on their thigh shattered into pixels. The shock pads in their bone suits sent them stumbling to the floor again, but they were still in the game. Shiv rushed at Paprika, roaring, spinning the ballistic mace. Paprika felt their heart in their throat. Even though it wasn't real, a weapon that big would send a serious jolt through their bone suit. Then relief washed over Paprika as they looked past Shiv's massive frame. Carlos dropped onto Shiv's shoulders from the platform above, ventilating them with bullets as he landed, driving the butt of his gun into their helmet. CARLO5 Broadside's SH-1V. Paprika scrambled to their feet as Shiv crashed down like a building being demolished. Carlos laid down cover fire behind Paprika as they ran forward. They couldn't believe they were about to do this, Paprika and Carlos, working together as a team. It felt like they were about to snatch $1 billion out of the sky. Paprika broke into a sprint and jumped high in the air, bouncing off the side of a platform, stretching out an arm and... Skeleton Crew has the flag. Carlos stood over Shiv. Riz was behind him. They cheered, high-fiving each other. Paprika looked back, smiling through their visor. They couldn't remember being happier than this. V-boom. The explosion blotted out everything. Jason rockets R1Z. JA50N rockets CARLO5. Double kill. Paprika watched Riz and Carlos fly through the words in the air. Jason barreled through the smoke towards Paprika, holding a garish-looking rocket launcher, smiling and nodding ominously. Paprika felt a sting as something from the other direction ripped into their shoulder. They slammed into a platform wall as a giant nail pulverized one of their NFT shoulder plates. Paprika pivoted round on one foot, ducking behind the platform as more nails smashed into the wall. Paprika peered out at Taki, who continued to fire in their general direction. Carlos's voice came over the voice chat. "Less than we're still down. Stay in cover till we get back in the..." "Don't worry," Paprika interrupted. "I got this." Paprika was thinking at light speed, the flag in hand. They could do this. All they had to do was run. They would prove they were more than Carlos's less talented sibling. Paprika would be the one to get their brother to the Pro League. "How many times do I have to tell you?" Carlos replied. "Be a team player for ONC." Paprika muted him. Carlos would thank them later. Paprika made a fast break for the Skeleton Crew fort, clutching the flag in one hand, blasting back in Jason's direction with the other. Their sniper rifle clicked empty. A message flashed up. "Out of ammo. Would you like to buy more?" "Yes?" "No?" Paprika nodded yes, panicking. Another message flashed. "Insufficient funds in your wallet." Paprika cursed, hurling the NFT sniper rifle. It disappeared with the words as Paprika steamed ahead with the flag, running up a wall and jumping onto a high platform. Jason locked on to Paprika's position. Paprika threw themselves from the platform with all they had. They reached out an arm, grabbing a higher ledge, the last platform between Paprika and the Skeleton Crew fort. All they had to do was pull themselves up without getting hit by the rocket. A maneuver they had pulled off hundreds of times in the juniors. Paprika paused, hanging from the ledge, looking back at Jason, savoring the moment. This was going to be epic. Jason fired the rocket launcher. A missile wailed towards Paprika. The gecko grip in Paprika's armored glove did its job, tightening their hold as it was supposed to. Their bone suit kicked into gear, allowing Paprika to hoist their own body weight to one side, slipping the rocket with ease. "Crew!" The rocket missed. Carlos and Riz cheered. Paprika could almost taste their new life. They strained, pulling themselves up over the top, onto the ledge. Paprika was there. Almost there, almost home. SKKKRAKKKKKKKK. The latch on Paprika's armor gauntlet snapped open. A huge fissure began to rip through the glove. Paprika watched in horror as it split, and their hand slipped out. It was only then, as they started falling, that they realized how high up they were. Paprika's heart thumped. The air got faster, the floor got closer. They screamed. Wham! Airbags inflated as they hit the floor. Flag dropped. Paprika sat up as the airbags deflated, winded and wheezing, struggling to get their bearings, to make sense of what just happened. A blur of blonde hair and blue armor streaked past, snatching the flag. Rug Mob has the flag. Paprika felt their world breaking apart. Like it always did when it seemed like things might finally be getting better. Helplessness and self-pity washed over them. No, they pushed their feelings down. No, Paprika had risked everything for this. They wouldn't let them take it. They scrambled up and after Tacky, feet pounding the floor, gaining on him. Paprika was almost on Tacky when they saw Jason, running straight at Paprika from the side. There was no time to move. Jason narrowed his eyes through his visor. He swung the rocket launcher, hitting Paprika with the NFT weapon, but also catching them with a mean, IRL right hook. JA50N Broadside's War HE4D. Paprika smashed into the side of a platform with a crunch. Their real helmet came clean off. They would have yelled foul if they weren't winded, but instead they crumpled to the ground in a heap. Their vision blurred and yellowed as the blow rocked through their skull. Behind them, Tacky vaulted up into Rug Mob's fort with the flag in hand. Flag captured. Rug Mob wins. Jason loomed over Paprika, looking down at their face, finally unmasked. Paprika looked up at him, trying to pretend they weren't humiliated, trying to get the air back into their lungs. Shiv and Tacky appeared behind them. Paprika touched their nose. Their hand came away bloody. Shiv burst out laughing. Carlos, tell me you didn't just sub your younger. You're younger. They couldn't even get the words out through the laughter, into a league game? Shiv asked in disbelief. Freaking classic. Wait, I know this little bozo, exclaimed Tacky, peering down from the fort at Paprika. You're that weird kid from the juniors. You fix printers, right? You fools are getting booted for this for sure, man. What are you? Like, a child soldier? This kid ain't even in the senior league, Shiv exclaimed. Tacky and Shiv fell about laughing. Jason smirked at Paprika, shaking his head. Paprika looked up at the bleachers. Even the kids up there were laughing. Riz and Carlos walked up. They looked humiliated. Paprika was broken. Their cheeks glowed hot. It was all lost. They wanted to cry. Jason swaggered past Paprika, walking towards the locker rooms. Now you know what the wrong side of me looks like. He hissed. He kicked Paprika's broadside helmet into their ribcage. Dickhead. The defeated warriors looked as bruised and tattered as the share car driving them home. They crawled along with the rest of the evening rush past the San Francisco Bay. Cars drove themselves together in formation like synchronized swimmers, perfectly optimizing traffic flow. Carlos sulked on one side of the pod with his arms folded. Riz sat next to him. Paprika slouched on the opposite seats facing them. Culture Cult was bumping 3D bass at a low volume. Snares crackled through the car's tinny speakers. Mr. Dallas, the biggest MC in 3D bass, was on the mic, riding the undulating bass lines. They stared out of the windows, into luminous, or at the floor. Anywhere but at each other. Paprika looked out at the traffic. Vehicles moved in quiet concert, electric motors giving off a low static hiss. They looked like clusters of moving buildings, some private, some share cars. The haves rode in pods that were extensions of their lives. Some looked like offices, where one last conference call was happening on the way home. Others resembled luxurious living rooms, gyms or yoga rooms. Tiny, meticulously designed spaces of calm. Many had their windows tinted. The have-nots occupied the slower lanes, traveling in rusting, dented share cars. Paprika held up their broken broadside glove like a dead rat. They looked at the others, breaking the silence they felt responsible for. I'm telling you, man, it's a major design fault, Paprika said, examining the shredded mitt. Too much pressure at the wrong angle, someone could get killed. PSSSH. I can't even afford a new pair now. Well, guess what? You don't need a new pair, said Carlos, glaring at Paprika, 'cause now we're banned from the league. Genius. Paprika sat back with a huff, tossing the glove on the seat. Riz looked at Paprika, then at Carlos, her eyes soft. All things considered, Paprika, I actually thought you did okay for your first league game, Riz said. Paprika smiled at Riz. She always saw the best in people. Paprika wasn't like, down bad. but they'd had a crush on Riz as long as she and Carlos had been friends. Yeah? Carlos said to Riz. You wanna go play in the juniors too? Riz shook her head. Paprika bit their lip and looked away. It wasn't Paprika's stupid idea to sub a junior into a league game on a noob account. They had done their best. But Paprika knew there was no point arguing with Carlos when he was mad. He shook his head. Whatever. We've got bigger problems now, he said, slumping into the seat. I figure we have maybe a week before we get evicted. Carlos had been banned from flex work long ago. Ditching to play Broadside was a habit Paprika had picked up from him. And they both knew they couldn't count on their father to make rent. As usual, they would have to figure something out. Paprika felt awful. They had bet everything on this game and lost. Yo, I can ask my parents if we can help? Riz said. Nah bro, come on, Carlos said, dapping his friend's shoulder. You guys don't have it much better. We gotta figure this out ourselves. Paprika tried to clear their mind. They had to think. They looked out of the window at a glowing, floating video ad the size of a billboard as the traffic ground to a halt. In the ad, an actor poured a bag of what looked like iron filings into an open 3D one. A soothing voice floated from the advertisement, wafting in through the car's tinny speaker system. Tubular, said a smooth, confident voice. The strongest carbon nanotube compound ever created. Only from Proda. The actor hit a button, looking satisfied the way only people in commercials can. The machine came to life. Nozzles squirted liquid metal, fusing it together in layers. A wrench was taking shape. Paprika stared absent-mindedly at the ad, grateful for the diversion. Then frowned. I put some of that in a printer in Pack Heights yesterday, Paprika said. It's hella tough. Carlos looked across at Paprika. Paprika reached out and beckoned the digital image of the wrench towards them, into the car. They tapped the wrench and it exploded into the molecular structure of tubular. They turned it around in their hands, admiring it in the luminous display. Imagine if we could make some gloves out of this, Paprika thought out loud. We could print like, military-grade bone suits. Carlos rolled his eyes. The traffic eased and they started to crawl forward. Riz looked at Paprika, thinking. How would we do that? She asked. You'd have to get into the design files? And why would that help us now? So? Paprika answered, flicking the image away. We'd get into the design files. Maybe we could sell some suits? Like as printable NFTs? Just low-key until we get some money together, pay the rent, pay the fine and get you guys back into the league? Riz looked at Paprika like they were a crazy person. So you mean like, hack the design files, and then sell illegal, off-brand, knock-off, janky-ass Broadside NFTs? Paprika shrugged. Carlos shook his head. What I keep telling you. Paprika's just like our dad. Man. Riz turned her body towards Paprika, as if to emphasize the seriousness of the point she was about to make. Didn't they teach you about that stuff in history class yet? You don't remember why they killed all those people back in 29 at City Hall? She asked. That was when the police still ran things. I don't want to think about what would happen if you messed with something owned by Proda now. They wouldn't know, Paprika answered. We'd be careful. Since when have you ever been careful? Carlos chuckled as the share car made the turn onto Market Street. You know what, don't even joke, we're almost at the checkpoint. At the top of Market Street, a thick concrete archway loomed into view, standing guard at the mouth of the financial district. It had the Proto Pyramid logo on its apex. Above the logo, Paprika made out the silhouette of a gun turret. Its various barrels, scopes, sensors and cameras faced down at the traffic. A robot manned the turret. It seemed to Paprika like it was staring right at them. Paprika had grown up with these robots watching over them and the rest of the city for almost as long as they could remember. They were known as marshals. There was a time when Paprika was younger when marshals weren't there. But that time felt hazy and misshapen, like perhaps they dreamed it. Marshals patrolled the line of vehicles, scanning each one before letting it pass. They were 5 feet tall. They walked awkwardly. Red and white armor plates covered their black endoskeletons, exposed only at the joints. They looked like puppets made from old pieces of traffic cone. Their blue backlit eyes scanned all they surveyed. Their antennae twitched like rabbit ears, relaying information back to an army of data scientists and security ICE. If you looked hard at a marshal, you could see fluid pumping around its hydraulic system. The red and white armor with blue eyes was designed to convey patriotism and authority. But marshals didn't make Paprika feel secure. The robots looked and acted like cops, but their objective was not to protect people, but property. Specifically, the intellectual property of Proda, its subsidiaries and other organizations that paid them for security services. An automated voice drifted from the checkpoint as they approached. To ensure your family's safety, only use approved Proda products and software, it announced. Any unauthorized downloading, printing, minting or growing can result in fines or imprisonment. A marshal stopped by the share car. Its eyes glowed as it moved its head, scanning the entire vehicle. It could access all the share car's data and travel logs. Paprika, Carlos and Riz watched as every RFID, radio frequency identification, chip in the vehicle was inspected. Paprika didn't look at the robot as it scanned their face, used to extra scrutiny at checkpoint searches. They were two dirt-poor kids with a Muslim girl, so they always got stopped. At least human cops were supposed to treat everyone fairly. Marshals were pre-programmed to racially and socio-economically profile. The robot's eyes ran over every detail, from the parts of the share car to the tiny plush toy in the shape of a Broadside helmet hanging from Carlos's backpack. Then the marshal froze. It turned and walked back to where Paprika sat with the window open. It stopped, leaning in. Paprika blinked back at it. What had they done? Just as Paprika figured it out, the robot snapped out a hand, yanked the back door open and dragged them out by the collar. "Hey!" Carlos shouted, "let go." The marshal slammed Paprika against the car. Its fingers closed around Paprika's throat. The robot raised its other hand. Paprika watched the hand twist and morph, fingers disappearing into the arm. A vortex opened in its palm, pulsing white-hot, a low sound rising as the pulse charged. Paprika felt the warmth from the heat blaster as the marshal aimed point-blank at their face. "Hands behind your head," it barked. Carlos and Riz looked at each other and climbed out. "Please, stop," Riz pleaded with the marshal, raising her hands in the air. "We didn't do anything. Get back in the cab." "Place your hands on the dash," shrieked a second marshal's voice from behind Riz and Carlos. They both jumped as two more marshals approached, heat blasters cocked. Riz and Carlos did as they were told. "An item back there has not been properly authenticated on the Proda blockchain," the marshal holding Paprika said, motioning to the truck's back seat. The second marshal kept its weapon trained on Carlos and Riz while the third opened the back door. After a few seconds, it emerged, holding up the damaged Broadside gauntlet from the back seat. Paprika looked at it, trying to speak despite the hand crushing their windpipe. "The chip must have broken in the fall," Paprika spurted. "It just happened. NNK. I swear." The marshal processed this for a few seconds, looking at Paprika, getting information from somewhere or someone else. Finally, decision made, the robot stepped back and lowered its weapon. "Get it fixed immediately," it ordered. "We catch you with this again, you will be taken in for questioning." The share car pulled away from the checkpoint as the marshals moved on to the next car. "Assholes!" Carlos seethed. Paprika rode low in their seat, trying to get their breath back. Riz looked over. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine, thanks," Paprika replied, shooting them both a look. "Paprika, you know if we raised up, it just would have made things worse," Carlos said. "The only thing they understand is brute force." Paprika looked back at him, puzzled. "Brute force?" Paprika frowned. Then their pink and blue eyes widened. They grinned like a mad scientist. "That's it," Paprika exclaimed. "That's what?" said Carlos, mystified. "I figured it out." "Figured out what?" "That's what we need. Brute force." "What are you talking about?" Paprika's eyes twinkled. "I just figured out how we're going to hack Broadside." Nothing in the living room at Paprika and Carlos's apartment made sense. It was like one reality cut and paste over another. Sometimes Paprika thought about redecorating. But to fix the place up would mean acknowledging what was broken. The ornate, fading wallpaper didn't go with the Broadside posters that covered it. The intricate flower pattern on the couch was a canvas for stains and graffiti. It was torn and patched up with duct tape, like an old punching bag. A 3D printer sat in one corner, not a 3D one, an old model that was just as beat up as the couch. Dust and neglect covered everything. A broken cleaner bot lay slumped against the wall like a sleeping drunk. The room was a vessel designed by parents from some previous decade that saw the future going one way, but at some point, it had gone another. Since then, the room had become something else. The teenage siblings imposed their version of fun and freedom on a backdrop of some family life that had faded, and then become lost. Paprika was no longer sad about this, or rather, they chose not to think about it. Both Paprika and Carlos preferred to get on with things. Mom was gone, and Dad may as well be. This was just life, and life, like living rooms, was for living in. Paprika sat cross-legged in an old office chair, at a rickety antique vanity. The desk looked like it was designed for a young debutante, but there was no makeup or perfume in sight. Instead, plates of Broadside armor were strewn across it. It was more of a workbench than anything else. Bottles, cartridges, and coils of 3D printer filament covered it, and a lot of the floor too. A cluster of glowing screens orbited above. Paprika conducted the orchestra of images and code via Luminous with their thoughts, eye movements and hand gestures. The only screen that didn't have Paprika's attention was the largest one in the room. It was floating a few feet in front of Carlos and Riz, who were kicking back on the couch watching the news. The president made a surprise stop at Proda HQ today, the anchor garbled, meeting with CEO Sam Kaur and other executives. But not everyone was there to celebrate. On screen, a crowd of chanting protesters stood outside the huge glass pyramid downtown. Fists pounded the air. A man with coffee-colored skin bellowed into a bullhorn. He looked out at the crowd through thick spectacles. His long dreadlocks shook as he spoke. He looked battle-weary from years of protesting, yet undeterred. Demonstrators gathered outside, continued the reporter, demanding, as they have for years, that the president sign the Accra Protocol, which they say would guarantee all Americans free energy, food, and basic resources. But it's a move the White House opposes. Accra has also received strong opposition from Proda and companies like it. Paprika turned and looked at the news story. If they gave us free energy and all that crap, be a lot easier for folks to make rent. Riz remarked, cracking her knuckles. Never gonna happen, Paprika replied. Riz reminded Paprika of Mom, always talking about protests and revolution. It was irritating. It wasn't the ideas Paprika didn't like, it was the idealism. Their mother had tried to change the world for the better. Now she was gone, and things were worse. The way Paprika saw it, there was no point trying to look after anyone else but yourself and your family. Riz looked at Carlos. You sure your dad can't help? Paprika's face tightened at the mention of his name. He's not answering. Last thing he said to me was he'd be back Monday, Carlos mumbled without looking away from the screen. This was what Dad always told them just before heading out on a metaverse binge that could last days, or sometimes weeks. It was weird to Paprika that people used to think the metaverse would change the world and make everyone more connected when they invented it. Sure, the AR stuff, Broadside and all, was great, at least some of it. But the only thing the more immersive stuff like VR had replaced was opioids and black tar heroin. When their dad went out on a binge, he always came back broker, sicker and angrier than before. Paprika had loved him so much when they were young. Now there were days when Paprika wished he wouldn't come home at all. Riz nodded. You know, my cousin Lalingo had a problem. Going deep in the metaverse and whatnot, he started going to VRA meetings. I'm not saying your dad has. Life is Dad's problem, Carlos interjected. The metaverse is just how he deals with it. Paprika didn't want to think about Dad now. They looked back at the news. The cameras cut to a phalanx of marshals plowing into the protesters outside Proda HQ. Paprika used to search for Mom's face in crowd shots like this, but not anymore. The marshals fired. Hot bolts of energy rippled through the air, mowing protesters down. Marshals came fitted with ads, active denial system, heat ray guns. They fired high radiation beams that made you feel like you were on fire. They didn't harm skin, clothes, or, allegedly, cause any long-term effects. Paprika had never been shot personally but was there when a marshal lit up 3 of their friends up outside school a few years back. Paprika would never forget the way they screamed. A PROTA spokesman said marshals were forced to step in and end the demonstration when the crowd turned violent. The protesters fled. Mostly they were students in jaw masks and ballys, and a handful of old hippies like the guy with the bullhorn. A few wore a symbol of a hand with an eye in the middle on their shirts. Some who had been shot were hysterical. Others writhed in agony on the ground, as if burning. None looked like they had turned violent. Carlos shook his head. Paprika knew he didn't like to talk politics any more than he liked talking about Mom or Dad. It was all more personal in their house. He looked over at Paprika and the quilt of screens. "Yo, I still don't get what you're doing," he called over, "but I know it ain't gonna work." "I told you, it's called a brute force attack," Paprika replied. "Real old school move. It's this app Dad made that runs through random letters, numbers, and characters until it finds the right password. I use it at work sometimes, but it takes ages and only gets you so far. You can't brute force the master settings on anything PROTA makes. The hashes are too long. So, I took the brute force app Dad made, and modified it a little so it makes copies of itself and runs from a lot of different places at once. Then all those dApps daisy-chained and working together can go faster." "So you're trying to brute force the Broadside network?" Riz interrupted. "Get in and change the designs?" "Right," Paprika nodded. "If I can brute force the Broadside software, get admin access and connect it to a brute-forced printer, we can design, modify and print all the Broadside gear we want." "Oh fantastic," said Riz. "And next we start selling illegally modded mint and print NFTs, and then, obviously, go to jail for the rest of our lives?" Paprika shrugged. "You got a better idea?" Carlos narrowed his eyes. "Don't you think 1,000 people tried this already, genius? That's what's messed up. I can't find anything new on this type of thing for years. It's like it all just stopped." Riz looked over at Paprika. "People probably got scared after the 29 massacre," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Maybe you should get scared too." Paprika looked back at her with a smile. "Right now, all I'm scared about is making rent," they said. "We'll worry about it in the morning," Carlos replied with a yawn. He glanced at the time and then at Riz, who was still staring at Paprika. Carlos nudged her. "Dude, the game's starting." Riz looked back at the screen, changing the channel. A stadium boiling with fans replaced the writhing protesters. A professional Broadside game was beginning somewhere sunny. It looked like a World Cup final. "Good evening and welcome to Broadside," began a sports commentator. "Brought to you by PROTA. Tonight, the US takes on Brazil, right here in Rio." Carlos and Riz relaxed, consumed by the Ultra HD experience enveloping them. Brand-sponsored player stats and the shiny, logo-covered bone suits of professional players filled the screen. It was every Broadsider's dream to make it here someday. The troubles of the day washed away as the pre-game build-up began. Paprika glanced back at Riz and Carlos. Their eyes began to close as commentators and pundits weighed in on tonight's action. They were both asleep before the game began. Across town at an establishment known as the Bubble Kitchen in South San Francisco, Koth Weems and his friend Omar Mendoza were starting the night shift, watching the game too. They stood behind the counter wearing crimson Bubble Kitchen t-shirts, serving customers absent-mindedly. They had the game's commentary turned down, with a 3D bass beat by Eclectic Method on in its place. Their eyes remained fixed on the screen floating above the door of the grubby fast food joint. To the untrained eye, it really looked like this was what was happening. Just 2 kids dishing up slop in the slums for minimum wage. Apart from the fact that you didn't see a lot of humans working fast food jobs anymore, it was a great front. No one had any idea what really went on here. Not unless they needed to. The tiles on the walls were hot and greasy. 5 tall glass vats stood on the workstation behind them. Fist-sized lumps of meat simmered inside the casks, floating on thermals of bubbling water. Koth nodded as an old guy came in to pick up an order. He turned to grab the food, while Omar stepped around him to ring the old guy up. Some people thought Koth and Omar were brothers. Koth liked this, and not just because he'd always wanted a brother, instead of a big sister who acted like she was his mom. Koth and Omar were both 19 with shaved heads and hard brown eyes, but they didn't look much alike. Koth was a small, muscular black kid. Omar was heavy-set and Hispanic. Koth knew they appeared similar because they moved as if in sync with each other, the way professional Broadside teammates did. Their connection reassured Koth that they really were that good, and that soon enough they'd be up on that screen themselves, out of the slums and away from this shady caper. He kept an eye on the game as he hit a button, and the lumps of meat started sinking towards the draining tray at the bottom of the cylinders. They need to put AXXO in at the start. Hit him hard from the jump, Koth griped as he hit another button, eyes never leaving the game. He shoveled vat-grown chicken and fries from the draining tray into a bag. Brazil don't play. This is gonna get ugly, early. He passed the bag to Omar. Nah, said Omar, shaking his head. He watched the old guy's wallet transfer a money icon to the bubble kitchen wallet icon floating above the counter. Let him come out hard, get gassed out, he said as he handed the bag to the customer, and an NFT receipt wafted from the bubble kitchen wallet into the old guy's wallet. Then throw in AXXO when they ain't got the energy to deal with him no more. The old man left with a nod. Omar nodded back. Yeah? Asked Koth, moving toward Omar like a boxer, jabbing at his ribs. What, like you get gassed 2 minutes into a game? Step off? Omar frowned as he shifted his heavy frame away from Koth, sucking his teeth, motioning like he might give him a backhand. You need that road work, son. Koth chuckled. Koth checked his watch. The customer, not these humps buying food, the real customer, was late. His watch was the last thing his mother had given him. It had his real name engraved on the back, Kanye. She'd called him that, before she passed, but no one else did. Koth stood for King of the Hill, a nickname he earned in the junior leagues because of his exceptional ability to hold a piece of territory. He met Omar in the juniors and had only gotten better since then. Nowadays they played on a respected South City Senior League team known as Halfway Crooks. Omar didn't move as fast as Koth, not by a long shot. But he was truly gifted with a sniper rifle. Koth looked out at the dimly lit street. Nothing. If this guy didn't show tonight, he knew he would catch hell from Danusha. Like most kids out here, Koth wanted to turn pro, but unlike your average league player, he actually had a chance. He knew that. Omar knew that. Hell, every Broadsider in South City knew that. Only person who didn't seem to get it was the person calling him again right now, his older sister Michelle. What up? Koth answered. I've been trying to reach you all day, Michelle complained, appearing in front of Koth. You avoiding me? Nah, Koth replied defensively, turning his camera off. Michelle's face disappeared. I'm at work is all. What's going on? Koth had to get rid of his sister before the customer arrived. Omar, sensing the need for privacy, took a cloth to the glass cylinder at the other end of the counter. Good news. There's a job opening on the cranes, Michelle said to Koth. Trainee level. I told the boss you would apply, he said he'd take a look. Koth rolled his eyes, turning a dial on the empty cylinder in front of him to a setting marked medium rare. The cylinders were known as vitro vats. They created food using in vitro technology, growing meat or produce from strands of DNA. Bubbles filled the liquid inside the cylinder. Small pinkish lumps appeared in the churning liquid. They grew into juicy steaks in seconds, browning off with a sizzle in the rippling spume. Look, I appreciate it, sis, I do. But I'm good here, Koth insisted. Come on, Koth. Michelle sighed. You can't work fast food all your life. Flipping burgers is a robot's job. You need a real plan if Broadside don't work out. PSSSH. You know that's not all we. Koth stopped talking, distracted by the opening door. A ruddy, weathered-looking woman in her 50s wearing a headscarf walked in. Danusha was the owner of Bubble Kitchen. She was a short Sri Lankan immigrant with a stern expression. Resting business face, as Omar called it. Everyone in the hood knew Danusha. She was an entrepreneur, with fingers in all manner of pies. Koth liked her, but he figured the less he knew about her other ventures the better, given what they were up to here. Danusha scanned the room like a marshal, inspecting the shop top to bottom. Omar turned and busied himself with a vat, opening it up so that steam escaped into the air like a genie. Danusha's gaze locked on Koth's phone icon. We're expecting a customer, Danusha snapped. I know Danusha, I'm sorry, my bad, family matter. Koth motioned to the phone icon. He cut his eyes over to a small doorway at the back of the shop with a restroom sign above it. Everything's set, we're ready. Danusha gave a short nod as she marched towards the door at the back of the room and went into the restroom. Koth went back to his call. You know I'm making good money with this right now, Michelle. It's the way you're making it that bothers me, Michelle snorted back. At least give it some thought? The cranes would be a good look for you. Aight. Koth said. I'll talk to you later. He hung up and sighed as he walked back to the counter, where Omar was still fixated on the game. Everything good? Asked Omar. Yeah, you know, said Koth. Michelle thinks she's my mom. Usual stuff. Omar considered this for a second. She did raise you. Koth turned and squinted at him. Oh, so now you want me to go work the cranes too? Nah, Omar replied. I got respect for Michelle is all. Stepping up like she did with you, holding that job. My brothers ain't like that. The door opened again. A pasty young guy hobbled in on crutches. There was a metallic stump where one of his legs should have been. He looked around, unsure of himself and his surroundings. I am sorry, he stammered. I think I have the wrong. Wrong what? What is it you think you have? Koth squinched his face up, folding his arms. They always gave people a hard time when they came in all nervous like this. It helped calm them down. Of course, they were right to be nervous, given what was about to happen. The guy blinked. Koth and Omar stood like a wall. I was told to say. I'm here for the delivery. Koth and Omar relaxed. Just messing with you, bruh, smiled Omar, waving the man inside. Koth opened the door at the back of the shop. Right this way. The guy relaxed and nodded. He followed Koth to the door at the back of the shop, into the dingy restroom. Danusha was nowhere to be seen. Koth locked the door behind them and turned to face the pasty-looking customer. You got the funds? He asked. The guy nodded. You a cop? Koth snarled, his frown reappearing. The man shook his head vigorously. Koth always hated this moment. He didn't think this guy was a cop, but one day, it could be. He liked this gig because it kept days free for Broadside and paid well enough to keep him in NFT ammo and armor, something a job on the cranes wouldn't do. But if he got caught, the only place he'd be playing Broadside was in the San Quentin State Prison League. But this guy was legit. Koth was like, 85% sure. So, he took a breath, and opened a wallet icon in the air. The man on crutches nodded and transferred his money. 3 ETH appeared in the register. Thank you for coming to Bubble Kitchen, said Koth with a smile. The wallet disappeared and Koth turned, walking over to the toilet. He banged his fist twice on the wall. An electric motor whined, and a section of the wall slid open. Koth ducked into the narrow doorway and dipped down into a dark tunnel. The guy on crutches followed, struggling to stay upright as he crouched. They went down a flight of narrow stairs into a dim, grimy basement that had been converted into a makeshift operating theater. Danusha stood next to an operating table in dental green scrubs, face shield, and face mask. Her headscarf was still on. A masked nurse, Kim, prepared a selection of tools on a bench next to Danusha. Various medical readouts bobbed around them on displays. Danusha nodded at the man as she snapped on surgical gloves, her face all business as usual. Behind them, in a vitro vat larger than the ones upstairs, a human leg with the same skin tone as the man on crutches was taking shape. It danced in the bubbling water as it grew. Paprika turned from the patchwork of screens as Carlos stirred. He looked around, bewildered, like he'd been asleep for hours. Paprika smiled at him. He smiled back as he rubbed his face. Paprika knew he wasn't really that mad about the game, but seeing him smile was reassuring. As much as Paprika didn't like being in his shadow, Carlos was the most important thing in the world. The Broadside game was still on the screen. Riz was fast asleep next to Carlos, her head hanging off the other side of the couch. Carlos sat up as the game on screen began to pick up pace. The commentator's voice rose with the roar of the fans in the stadium. "And it's AXXO for the win," exclaimed the commentator. "The world's #1 Broadside player has the flag. He makes this and Team USA advances to the semifinals." Carlos stood, wiping his eyes, taking in the game. He watched as AXXO, a quarterback-sized Broadside player, snaked through the arena. He ran with the flag in one hand, sidestepping the enemy, making effortless headshots. "Gee yeah, come on," Carlos cheered. Riz woke up with a start, rubbing her eyes at the screen as AXXO stormed home, capturing the flag. "Gee yeah," Carlos shouted, punching the air. "That's how you capture a flag. USA! USA! USA!" Riz, still coming round, looked over at Paprika's glowing mess of screens. "Geez, you're still messing with that?" she asked sleepily. On the largest of the cluster of floating screens in front of Paprika, a message kept flashing up. "Access denied. I'm almost there," Paprika replied. "PSSSH, you said that an hour ago," said Riz. She lay back on the couch and closed her eyes. By midnight, fatigue had claimed all three of them. Paprika slept deeply, curled up awkwardly on the beat-up office chair. Carlos was almost falling off the couch, snoring. Riz lay comatose next to him under a blanket. Paprika's screens floated in the air above them, rippling like jellyfish. The message kept flashing. "Access denied. Access denied. Access denied." Beep! Paprika opened an eye at the sound, frowning, looking over groggily at the screens. Then opened both eyes. Wide. Finally, they jumped up. The access denied message was gone, replaced with the clean, blank interface of a back-end program. A solitary green command line blinked in the void, waiting for instruction. "Yes!" Paprika whispered, and then shouted, "Yes!" Waking the others, Riz looked over. A title screen appeared. "Broadside, System Admin Panel." "What the?" Riz murmured, wiping the sleep from her eyes. "It worked, we're in!" Paprika exclaimed, exploring screens frantically. "We unlocked it. It's all here." Riz stood, backing away from the cluster of screens in disbelief. Carlos looked around, blinking like he was still asleep. Designs and codes started to fill the room. "We can do anything we like," Paprika beamed. "Play for free, improve the game, mint and print new armor, whatever we want." "No," Riz said, shaking her head. "No. Turn it off." "What? No way." Paprika turned to her, getting defensive. Carlos stood up, looking at them both. "What's happening?" Riz kept her eyes fixed on Paprika. "Shut it down," she ordered. "This is crazy. I didn't think you'd actually do it. Do you know how freaking illegal this is? This is our ticket to a better life, Riz." Paprika countered. "I lost us the game, but I can fix this, don't you see? We can sell mods for the game, make some money, you guys can go to the pros and..." Paprika's voice trailed off. Riz wasn't buying it. She grabbed her backpack from the couch as she turned towards the door. Paprika jumped up and grabbed her hand. Riz looked down at their hand on hers and paused. It felt warm. Their eyes met. "Wait," Paprika said softly. "Fine. I'll turn it off. I don't want to go to jail either. But if we don't try something, we'll be living in the slums before the week is out. This is our only option. Just let me print one pair of new gloves, okay?" One pair? Riz sighed, shaking her head. But she wasn't moving. Paprika backhanded several bottles of empty printer filament onto the floor and stretched a hand down the side of the printer, finding the power button. The printer whirred, flash heating filings, fusing them together layer by layer. In a few seconds the machine pinged. Paprika's new Broadside gauntlets emerged. They held one up, examining the glove, eyes wide, before sliding it onto their hand. It tightened around the wrist, conforming and adjusting itself until the fit was perfect. Paprika turned to Riz and Carlos. These are better than my real pair. Paprika picked up the old broken gauntlet, crushing it like a tin can in their new strengthened glove, before chucking it into the recycle chute on the top of the printer. The machine churned the glove back into filings, separating each material as it went. Riz put the other new glove on. It constricted around her arm the same way. She blinked and let out a laugh. You actually fixed the fault. Carlos examined it too. He looked impressed. Paprika smiled slyly. Okay, so I guess I'll just shut all this down then. Whoa. Hold up, Carlos said. Print me some too? After that, the talking stopped. None of them wanted to think about the implications anymore. Even Riz seemed too caught up in the thrill to worry about the risk. Besides, they were saving everything locally. Air-gapping devices, no cloud, cold wallets, noob accounts, no trace, but a VPN too, just in case. They accessed the physical armor files, tweaking and modifying designs, experimenting with materials. Printing out Frankenstein-like mashups of different plates and joints. It was no longer just about the rent money. This was fun. Some were instant improvements. Most were failures that went immediately back into the recycle chute. They built and destroyed quickly, honing prototypes until they hit upon something they liked. The hours got smaller. They molded custom helmets, shaped like animal skulls, aliens, poop emojis, teapots. Nothing was off the table. They skinned the armor in colorful patterns and borrowed designs from friends. The armor looked hand-drawn because it was. Thoughts were drawn with fingers in the air and saved as designs, which were then printed and became real. They opened the files for the holographic NFT armor, tweaking those designs too. They added barrels, magazines, and scopes to guns. They made inoperable, unwieldy, cartoonish weapons. They tested them on each other. Fake firestorms filled the room as grenades and explosives were flung around liberally. They made things that made the game more fun. They made things that made it more efficient. They made armor and weapons that made them laugh. But most of all, they made these things because for the first time in their lives, they could. The sun started to rise. Daylight crept in around the edges of the curtains, and finally, they paused. They stared at the tapestry of screens they had stitched together. It filled the room floor to ceiling, displaying a new hand-drawn world of exaggerated new bone suits and NFT weapons. New IRL gauntlets and armor plating covered the vanity and floor. 3 brand new bone suits sat like knights on the couch, their cartoonish animal and alien skull helmets resting on their chest plates. Even as real items, they looked like half-finished sketches. The multicolored paint jobs made them look like mech warriors at summer camp. The overheated printer sat exhausted in the corner. There was no more material to work with. Every filament, cartridge and bottle of filings was spent. They looked around the room, as excited as they were sleep-deprived, in awe of their creations. And that's when it hit them. Riz blinked. What did we do?